imagine expanding your team's abilities without adding headcount. At Element 451, AI assistants like admissions advisors and student success coaches work alongside your staff to deliver personalized experiences at scale, offer round the clock support, and uncover data driven insights. It's not just about doing more, it's about doing it smarter. Elevate your team with an AI workforce that delivers personalized, scalable, and impactful experiences across the student lifecycle. Learn more at element451.com. Hi, I'm a higher ed CMO, and I have a confession to make. I think that leadership in higher education is an area that needs a ton of attention right now. We do not do a good job in higher education of preparing people to lead. And I think we do a lot of things to support environments that aren't necessarily good for everybody in our workplaces. And so when I met Ellen Whitlock Baker a couple of weeks ago and we were talking about this passionately, I was like, we need to record our conversation because A, we have a ton of spicy things to say. And B, I think it's going to be useful for a lot of both current leaders and aspiring leaders. I'm really happy to be bringing in my guest, Ellen Whitlock Baker. She's an executive coach, speaker, and leadership consultant who's passionate about challenging outdated workplace norms to create more equitable and healthier work cultures for everyone. She is a seasoned advancement leader who held leadership positions in alumni engagement at the University of Washington and Seattle University. She's active with CASE and most recently served on the CASE Alumni Commission. She is the owner and principal of EWB Coaching, and she supports individual and team clients in managing transitions, building healthy teams, getting unstuck, and setting boundaries that protect well-being. I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO, a podcast that empowers higher ed marketers to bring innovation, creativity, and excellence to their work. I'm your host, Jaime Hunt. Join me every 2 weeks for discussions with some of the best minds in higher education marketing. Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO is part of the Enrollify Network, a robust collection of podcasts designed to help higher educational professionals like you grow. Explore our other shows at enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. I am so happy to be here with Ellen Whitlock Baker. Welcome to the show, Ellen.
Hi, Jaime. Thank you for having me.
Ellen and I met a couple of weeks ago and we got talking about leadership and what makes good leaders. And I was like, this is obviously one of my favorite things to talk about. And I'm so excited to have Ellen to come on the show to talk a little bit more about this. And Ellen, can you tell us a little bit about like the work that you do in your consultancy around leadership?
Yeah, sure. Similar to you, I launched just a little bit ago, but I've been in the higher ed space for 20 years, mostly in alumni engagement. And I launched to do my own executive coaching and leadership consulting, which is what I do now. And I love it. And I'm also I've found that like the longer I've been away from the workplace, the more I can identify some of the toxic norms that exist there that when you're in it, you don't really realize they're happening. And so I'm very passionate now about helping people who are in the workplace find what those norms are that just don't work anymore. And how can we set boundaries so that we have a really healthy workspace for everybody? And so I've been really having a good time diving into that.
That resonates so much with me. There's a friend of mine who left higher ed around the same time that I did, maybe like 6 months before me. And I left a little less than a year ago. And you're right. It's like the longer you're away, you're like, I can't believe we did that. I can't believe that was the thing that happens. It's wild.
I know. And it's like, it's sort of horrible. You think,
right.
And one of the things I talk about a lot, and this is why I got into coaching actually, is because I had an executive coach many years ago, my first coach I'd ever had. And she helped me really realize that the workplace around me was the problem, not me.
Mm.
When I was hearing from my boss that it was me, I wasn't fitting into the mold of what a professional should look like, and sound like and feel like, because I'm really authentic and I don't like to be toxically positive, and I'm just like to say it how it is. And there are a lot of people who don't like that in leadership. And so that's really what got me into coaching, was to have her make such a difference in my life. It just really was the turning point for me. And so as we've gone through the pandemic and the racial reckoning, and now post pandemic, and God knows what's happening right now federally, I've been really, really seeing that's true for a lot of people, not just me, and particularly women of color in the workplace. So I'm hopeful that, like, now that we're out, I hope we can do good. you know.
I agree. Well, and some of my listeners know in October of 2024, I completely lost my voice, and it wasn't from illness. In
Mm-hmm,
part, it came
mm-hmm.
from I was speaking in the wrong register, and I was speaking in the wrong register because I had a boss a number of years ago that told me my voice was too high and nobody would ever take me seriously. And so I ended up speaking with really bad vocal fry for years because of that message. And I don't think a man would have ever heard that message. I'm not sure that an older woman, because at the time I was in my 30s, would have heard that message. And it was so toxic, and it came from a female leader. And it was such
Mm-hmm.
a toxic message to be told this, and then for it to have health consequences for me, over almost 2 decades later was, wild. So the reason I tell that story is because I think what you said about sort of these toxic patterns of wanting people to change and comply with these sort of quote unquote professional norms, they don't just have an impact on you at work, they have an impact on you well beyond that.
Oh, absolutely. And I will confess I have a cold right now, so I am talking like this. um, I know I don't have that problem, Jamie, but that's probably my years of actor training that I did before I did all this. But God, there's so much to unpack in what you just said, because the thing that's coming top of mind is the woman on woman crime, so to speak. And I've been seeing a lot about this lately on my LinkedIn feed and thinking about it a lot, that we're hardest on each other in a lot of ways. And I know that it's because those toxic norms are making us feel like we have to compete, because there
Mm-hmm.
isn't enough at the table for everybody. And, how many mediocre white men do you see, walk in and just kind of continue to be mediocre and get all the things, the accolades and the raises and the titles. And it feels like with women, even though that, a lot of us are getting those things, maybe not as much, but we're like competing with each other for it. And so it's just this very, I think it's a really sad byproduct of the patriarchy. And like, what I want to do is, even in my own self, change that, because I see myself seeing, like, oh, Jamie just published her book. That's nice. I'm so jealous. I haven't published my book yet. Like, my initial thought is not always, oh, yay, I'm so happy for her, but often like, oh, shoot, I'm comparing myself to her and I'm not doing well enough. And I have found some of my worst bosses have been women, because they're, I think, harder on us than they are on men. That's something I would pull out from what you just said, and definitely something that's a big piece, especially white women, a big piece of what we need to come to terms with.
I couldn't agree more. And I think I appreciate your candor about that part about like seeing somebody be successful and having your first gut instinct not necessarily be a celebration. Cause, you know, I'm not sure I would have admitted that if you hadn't admitted that, but I've had that feeling too of like, oh,
Yeah.
this person got a good thing. And I think you're right. It comes from that feeling of there's only so many slices of the pie for people
Mm-hmm.
who are like me. And this person got one of those slices. And so
Mm-hmm.
that means there's one less slice for me, which isn't how it should be. But I think the
Mm-mm.
reality of the world that we live in is it's not necessarily wrong. I mean, we do live in a society where, you know, white men are more advantaged in a lot of ways for jobs and for promotions and whatever. I think higher ed's probably better than other industries, but yeah, I really appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, I want to credit. There's a really awesome woman I follow on LinkedIn. Her name's Erin Gallagher, and she is publishing a book. It's called Hype Women, and I know it's coming out really soon. But she's been posting very honestly about this recently, and that's really what opened my eyes to it. Um, and I appreciate, just like you did said for me, what I just did. I really appreciated her honesty because then it makes me talk about it more, which I think is the whole point of all of this is it is so much easier for leaders to keep everybody sort of feeling like they have to compete, being quieted, not being able to speak truth, not being able to, point out things that really aren't working well. It's easier to keep us down, I guess, is the, like the sort of overall way to say that. And as a leader, I've participated in that too. Like I'm complicit in many ways as I've learned and learned as I've gone on, but um, especially as you're a new leader, you're not like, I don't know about you, but I didn't get any training on how to be a leader. Like maybe there was one class that we could take, but we didn't have to. And so I see this issue with we don't train people up to be leaders for today. So the people who are training us to be leaders are the people who became leaders yesterday. And so we're just kind of perpetuating that cycle. So that's a piece that I think we have to really concentrate on.
I couldn't agree more. I'm really curious about what your thoughts are on what people misunderstand most about what good leadership looks like.
One of the things I see consistently with my clients, and that I felt as well when I was a new leader, was that people misunderstand that they have to do everything and they have to be involved in everything. And I really believe if you give your team members amazing resources, this is why I love coaching, because you have that person who is external and their cheerleader and is really out for, making sure that they're doing okay and helping them think through things. It makes a huge difference in how people approach new roles, especially leadership roles. But, if you give your team resources like coaching, like training, um, you give them a very, very clear scope of work. That's another thing I think in higher ed we're particularly bad at, which is, sort of, oh, go figure out how to program to 600,000 alumni, go. And it's too big.
Mm-hmm.
And, we need to get more specific, especially in areas where it's harder to measure the results. So with fundraising, and I think with marketing in some ways, like there are some metrics that are decently telling you if you're going in the right direction or not. It's been hard with alumni engagement to figure that out over the years. And so I think in our space in particular, there's been so much vagary that coming in as a new leader, you don't know where to go necessarily. Then you get involved in everything and you feel like you have to be on all the time and your phone is constantly pinging you with your team's messages and your texts and your whatever. I mean, there are people I coach who are constantly like looking to the side because their team's messages are coming in, and I have to say like, this time is for you. Put that
Right.
away. So that's really, I think that's a big piece, but it's not about, again, like it's the system that's making it hard for us to do that well, because most systems, especially in higher ed, don't prioritize things like executive coaching or
Mm-hmm.
professional development training. It's the first thing that goes when all of our budgets are cut, which
Yes.
is what's happening right now.
Yes.
And there's a million recorded things that we get to watch, like all of the trainings, but they're about like how to find out if there's asbestos in the walls of where
Right.
you're working,
Right.
and
Or
like
they're
they'll
like
tell you, Deb, I
super
never took
surface
that.
level. They're like
Yeah, yeah,
like
super.
don't like make fun of somebody's age at work. Like
Right.
cool,
Like,
thank you. Like
here's what a microaggression is. Like it's really feels like it's a legal tick box. Like
yes.
HR's like, I have to show everybody this so that I said that we did our part. And we told Jamie what a microaggression is. So if she does a microaggression, then we told her, and it's
Yes.
just So this thought of being human centered, and leading with empathy, which you talk about a lot, like that is a big piece of this. Empathy is, about putting yourself in someone's shoes, but knowing what it takes to get them to where they need to be. And we just do a terrible job of that, I think, in higher ed. Sorry, higher ed, but we don't do a great job.
No, we don't. And I have friends who work in corporate America who've had so much training and coaching.
Mm-hmm.
Like they were identified as someone with potential. So they were put
Yeah.
into a leadership, process. Versus, I feel like in higher ed, it's like somebody resigned and you're the interim now. And then the next thing you know, that person's now the director and they've had nothing. And I think what people tend to bounce between is one of two things. Either they're a micromanager or they're a neglectful leader. So they either
Mm-hmm.
feel like they have to have their finger in every single thing,
Yep.
or they're like, I don't know how to give people what they need, so I'm just not going to. They can just do their jobs. I just did my job. So why do they need anything more from me than that? And there's definitely a happy medium between those two things.
Yeah.
But so many people, when I talk to people so often, I help a lot of people with like job searches and stuff. And they tell me
Mm-hmm.
either their boss gives them nothing or their boss is just so in their business that they feel unempowered. They don't feel like they're trusted. And it's just really sad because it's actually relatively easy to balance those things. But if you're never taught how do you do it?
Exactly. And if you don't have the model of, I don't know, like, when I was coming up in higher ed, like as a younger professional, my model was people who worked too hard and too many hours. And you were a great worker if you came in before everybody else and
Yes.
left after everybody else. And you should dress as the boss dresses, which is so ridiculous when you think about it, because your boss makes a lot more money than you do, right?
Right.
Um, and just all of these sort of norms that we grew up with that didn't teach us anything. And so I really see that generationally coming. I mean, you do too, but like, when you have Gen Z coming up, and not to say everybody is exactly the same in each generation, but in general, Gen Z is pushing at those norms. And those of us kind of in that middle, like I'm sort of an elder millennial, young Gen Xer, like I'm right there. Like we don't know what to do because half of us agrees with them and understands that what they're pushing for is actually things like supporting people as they become new leaders, work-life balance, being able to be really honest and transparent at work. And those were all the things we were told to hide. So we're
Mm-hmm.
having this like constant battle in our brains about, what to do. But that's why I think it's important that like you have this podcast and we're talking about things like this as openly as we can, because now that our generation, I think you're younger than me, but I'm assuming now that
I'm
our
older than
generation,
you, actually.
oh, hey,
Yeah.
well, you look younger. Um, but we're in charge now. And when I see my peers replicating what our leaders did when we were young professionals, I get super bummed out
Mm-hmm.
because we have such a capacity for making change right now. Um, but especially for those of us who are women, especially for women of color or folks that are disabled, or folks that are queer, it's just harder, and
Yeah.
it's not safe necessarily. So, like, how do you fight against these bad practices, like not training your folks to be leaders and not giving them the support they need as they go through it? Instead, you're micromanaging them. How do you actually start at the leadership level changing where resources are going so that you're not investing in some another fundraising consultant, but you're actually investing in something that will help your team stick around and work really well together? And
Yeah.
that mentality is just not there.
The whole back third of my book is about leading with empathy. And I have had so many conversations with people about the difference between sympathy and empathy. And
Yeah.
so, like, let's say you have someone that comes to you and is like, you know what, my parent has dementia and they're going to need to go into memory care, and I need to help, them navigate getting into that, getting used to it, selling their home, fill in the blank, some sort of elder care situation. And having a boss that's like, oh my gosh, I'm really sorry. That sounds really hard. That's sympathy. That's great. That's the bar. That's the minimum.
Yeah, the minimum,
Empathy
bare
is
minimum.
right. Empathy is like being able to see that person is going to be having a lot of mental load on them for some period of time. That person's going to need some flexibility. They're going to need me to be very upfront and say, hey, I am giving you permission to take the time off that you need to do this. I'm giving you permission to take advantage of the flexibility. And that can't be one conversation. That's like every time you have a one on one, how are things going? If you need to be having more flexible hours, will you deal with this? I'm reminding you that that's okay. All of that kind of stuff. That's what empathy looks like. And at the end of the day, I think that in higher education, we should be seeing people as human beings with messy, complex, and very complicated lives, and honoring that and doing the things we need to do for people. And honestly, I had somebody who had a daughter who had attempted death by suicide. I was like immediately like, you work from home, you take as much time off as you need. You let me know when you feel it's okay to come back and be physically in the office. If that's 6 months, if that's a year, this is a life or death situation for your child,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
this is, and constantly checking in and making sure that when that person did start coming back into the office in a hybrid way, that they were actually ready, it was going to be okay. That person would die for me to this day, right?
Yeah.
That person busted their butt. I could ask that person to do anything and everything. I didn't abuse this, right? But you know what I mean? It created loyalty. It created somebody who is like, I'm going to work even harder for you because you see me. And so like if you need a business case for why to be empathetic as a leader, how about that?
Totally. Totally. And then there's some interesting like intersectionality that goes on there. And also there is an issue with what happens to their work, because a lot of times not what I find, this is absolutely true. If somebody leaves for maternity leave, FMLA, gets a new job, whatever, their work gets dumped on someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And usually it's the leader. And if it's not the leader, it's someone else, or it's spread out throughout the team. And I hope to God you're paying people temporary pay increases if you're doing that,
Mm-hmm.
because that's just awful if you're not. If you're making somebody take on more work, you've got to give them a TPI, which
Mm-hmm.
also tends to be the first thing to go in budget cuts. So,
Yes.
you're not making your people happy. So I think that's one issue that we have to think about. Like when you have more work than can actually be done in a day, which most of us, that's what our situation was in higher ed, then, and this constant like urgency, 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 it has to happen now, it has to happen now, then you can be that empathetic as a leader. And that's certainly how I like to operate as well. But then that work goes somewhere else. And so it's this balance of like, yes, I want this person to take as much time as possible, but I can't give their work to this person because they're already underwater. So then I'll take it on, but I'm going to do it not as well because I've got 47 other things going on. So there's this, I think we have to have a conversation about how much work we're doing and how much is on our plate in order to really have that empathy come through. And then the second thing I'll say is that I learned this from somebody who worked for me who needed to take some leave and who was a woman of color. And she said, I don't know if I can or want to take leave because I'm judged differently in this workplace. And if
Wow.
I go away for a while, that doesn't look good for me. And I hadn't even thought of that because I'm a white woman of privilege, and I feel like I could go away and it would be okay and I could come back, and I'd feel guilty because of course you always feel guilty, which is a whole other conversation we have to have, Jamie. But I think that's another thing to consider is that like everyone's approaching, everybody has different lived experiences, and there are going to be, you know, both race and gender and sexuality and ableism and all the things might make it hard for some people to feel like they can take that time in this workplace where not everything is fair.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope people will consider that as they, um, be as lovely and empathetic as you are. Just consider both, like, if this person doesn't take the time, there might be a deeper reason to why, or if they do, maybe making it that there's just less work for everyone in
Mm-hmm.
general, like taking some things away rather than saying, well, we still have to do, the 5K run for the alumni, because no one cares. Like, it really doesn't matter. The 5K run cannot happen and everyone will be okay. But we're like
Yes.
in this mode of like, it must happen. And then it just, it's so awful.
That's so true. And I think, in the case of let's just go with the scenario that I gave, I think empathy is not just also thinking about that person and how that person's situation, but how that's going to downstream impact the rest of the team and what deadlines are going to need to be adjusted or not. The person might say, yes, I just need more flexibility. I need to be able to go to appointments at 3, but I'll work in the evening or whatever. But if they're like, I'm not going to be able to do this project or I have to go out on FMLA, like, you're absolutely right. I know I had a team member that had to take like a 3-month leave. We gave a temporary pay increase to the person that was taking on some of the stuff. Her AVP and I sat and went through what are the things that we're just not going to get done this year because this is
Yes.
this academic year, because we can't do it with one person down. And so what are we going to not do and reprioritize that work? And I think that's something you make such a good point. I feel like in higher ed, not just in marketing, not just in enrollment, not just in alumni relations, but across the board, we behave as though every task that's on our to-do list is life or death.
I know.
And it's not, right? There's things that drive the
No.
institution forward that need to be done. And then there's things, I'm going to say something really heated here, and I realize I'm getting like spicy, but there's things where
Love
your
it.
VP just needs to have the freaking courage to tell the president, we're not going to be able to do this because we're down a person. Right. But there's so many
1000%.
times where the VP doesn't want to have to tell the dean or or another VP or the president, we're not going to be able to get this done because of XYZ. And
Hmm.
so then everybody else just has to absorb that work. And
Yeah.
that's ridiculous.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. No, be that spicy, because I totally agree. And I mean, I think there's so many reasons for the overwork, overall grind culture, and feeling like we have to prove ourselves, and like, capitalism in general makes us think that we have
Right.
to keep earning and earning and earning. And the only way to do that is to get new positions and get new positions and get new positions, or change jobs, which is hard for
Mm-hmm.
everyone. And I don't remember the statistic, but like, companies lose so much money from people leaving.
Mm-hmm.
Not only the months that they're not there, but also like the having to recruit and hire and all the things. And yet we continue to create these workplaces where we are doing way too much. And, you know, I'm watching all of the things happen right now with this administration that are very much like targeting higher ed, nonprofits, and the public sector, where
Mm-hmm.
already those people are getting paid so much less than the
Yes.
private sector. Like, people have seen my salaries who work at like Microsoft, and they're like, "Oh my God," like,
Right.
and but it felt like a lot to me because I finally made AVP, and some of what we're paying our early entry folks is just criminal. They can't live in Seattle for what we're paying them,
Right.
and yet we can do nothing with that. And so, I mean, I wandered a little bit, but the point of that is that not only are we not paying people enough and making their work situation very tenuous currently because of everything that's happening from the administration, we also are making them feel like they have to do all of this stuff. And like, there's just such a culture especially in nonprofits and the public sector, but especially in nonprofits and higher ed, I would say, where it's like, you have to do it all or
Mm-hmm.
else it will all fall apart. And
Yeah.
that's because, that's how it's structured. Nonprofit means, well, we shouldn't have as many staff members as we need because, that money could go to directly to the people we're serving or the cause that we're doing, but it doesn't do anyone any good if the staff keeps burning out and turning over and leaving the sector because you weren't able to hire that third person to do marketing, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think this is a huge issue for us. And I keep thinking back to, I think I just wrote like an Instagram, or sorry, a LinkedIn post about this, but like, I think back to all of the times where I worked late, or I went on the trip, or I went to the event, or I pushed myself super hard to do the thing that needed to get done. And now looking back on it, I'm like, that was not, I didn't need to do that, you know? And so part of it is like us teaching ourselves. And that's a lot of what I talk about in like my workshops and when I do talks is like, you have to teach yourself to have those boundaries because the workplace they'll give them to you. It's
Mm-hmm.
not going to stop. So how do you create them safely so that you're not stuck in that, like, it must be done. We're not doing heart surgery. I said that all the time. I'm like, we are not operating on someone right now.
Right.
It's like, are these alums going to be happy? Like,
Right.
of course I want everyone to be happy. I want my team to be happy more than I want those alums to be happy. And I think that we make the wrong choice a lot of times, especially with donors.
The next era of higher ed is here. AI that's both scalable and deeply human. At the 2025 Engage Summit, learn how to use agentic AI to personalize outreach, engage proactively, and free time for what matters most. This Don't Miss event is happening June 24th and 25th in Charlotte. Enrollify listeners get $50 off with code Enrollify50. Don't wait. Register at engage.element451.com. Well, so listeners, we're almost a half hour into recording, and I've gotten to one of the questions on this because I mean, honestly, there's so many good points that we keep tangenting off on, but
I
I think
know.
I think this is, it goes back to one of my very first guests was Kevin McClure, who talked about, and he wrote the book that's coming out in July. I've already pre-ordered it, called The Caring University, about how universities
Ooh.
have kind of made this sort of toxic mission. Like it's like we're mission driven. And so that means that you should sacrifice your own life and your own
Mm-hmm.
health in order to achieve the mission, right? And
Mm-hmm.
he talks about that a lot. And I cannot wait to read his book. He's so brilliant. But that's kind of it. It's like, well, but our students are students are students. Yes, absolutely. We are serving our students and we want to do the best by our students or our alumni or whatever our audience is. But we can't do it at the expense of the health and well-being of our teams.
No, we can't. And we keep putting our money into things that will make us work harder and faster and more rather than into our teams,
Mm-hmm.
And there are some universities that are trying really, really hard to not do that. And I see it happening.
Yeah.
But when you're being crunched and you're in the systems that we're in, it's like, well, we're going to, prioritize the donors above all else or the students, right? And obviously the students, like they're there, they need to be supported in a really big way. But if you keep paying the people that work with the students so much less than you're paying other people in the institution, you're going to have constant turnover and your students aren't going to have a great experience. So
Right.
it's kind of a like, can you just step back for a second and say, how do we remake this so that we can actually do this work without burning through staff so much?
Well, it sort of makes me think about, let's say you're saying we need somebody to do these 20 things. And so we're going to hire 2 entry level people because we can only pay $35,000. And so we're going to do these $35,000 a year people are going to do these 20 things. It might be better to actually strategically go through those 20 things and say, what are the 10 that are actually going to move the needle, and hire one person for 70,000 who has
Yeah.
expertise and who's, invested and isn't going to
Yep.
turn over in a year when they get offered a job that
Yep.
pays more, and like have continuity and do 10 things really, really well.
Yep. And this is where I think actually AI can play a part because as
Mm-hmm.
we're like, I use AI all the time. I use ChatGPT all the time now. It does amazing things like take a lot of random paragraphs I've written and make them sound better together. So we know it takes meeting notes, it summarizes them. Like, I'm not an AI expert, but I know that it's going to take a lot of that busy work, and it already is, out
Mm-hmm.
of the way
Mm-hmm.
so that we can do that. We can take that money that was going to pay three people very poorly and pay one person very well, or at least a living wage, while the tasks that used to be done by people can be done manually. And I'm not advocating for like losing positions in our industry, but I think we could reallocate that money so that if you do work in higher ed, you're actually making a living wage. And,
Right.
we can also cut a little off the top. Like I see what people are making at the highest levels. And, you know, I guess it's still less than like a CEO would make in a business. So it's still not as much as the private sector, but there's a distribution problem too, I think.
Well, and I think too, like, so I remember I got a raise at a position where I was like a senior leader and I got a raise. And I remember I actually asked my boss, could we take a part of what you're giving me and give part of it to one of my team members? And he looked at me like I was out of my mind. He's like, what? I'm like, well, no, she works really hard. I'm afraid we're going to lose her. Like, she's paid way less than her position would pay in the private sector. Like, can we give her, and he honestly, Ellen, he said, no, she has to go get another offer for more so that we can give a counter offer in order to give her a pay increase. And it's like,
Gross.
we've made it so hard to even like give people raises at a lot of institutions. Now, that's not the case everywhere. I will say I've been at places where I've been able to give raises. I think that's like my legacy at my last two employers was I was like, everybody's pay sucks. Like, let's take this one vacant position, dissolve it, and spread that money out, that kind of thing. But we make it so it's like an act of Congress. I hate to say it like that, but to give somebody a $2,000 a year bump, it's just silly.
It's so ridiculous. And I've seen that happen so many times. And what's so interesting, Jamie, is like you were willing to give up some of your raise, which probably still didn't even bring you to
No,
par
no.
with your male counterparts.
Right.
And
I was the
and like
lowest paid at my
right.
level.
And so
Yes.
even then we're still as women like thinking, okay, well, the system's not working for me, so I'm going to give up something of myself to help someone else, which is wonderful. And I love the concept, but also it's taking away from you. Again, it's the pie,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not
Yeah.
pie. I have always found, I don't know about you, but in any university I've ever worked in, if you need money for something, I don't care if you're in a spending freeze or a hiring freeze or it's a recession, if it's something that's important enough to the VP or whoever, they find the money every time.
Yeah.
And I've been the recipient of that too. I'm not saying like I have been given too generously. Like I was able to have a coach, which was amazing, and not a lot of other people got that. As sort of, it was a retention kind of thing. They couldn't give me more money, so they got me a coach, which was great and ultimately helped me leave that workplace. But the it just makes me so sad that that's how we have to look at it, and this like scarcity mindset, which again empowers the people in power. Like that gives them so much power to be like, oh no, we have to follow this system and I can't just give somebody a raise. And and yes, there's so much legality that goes into it, and I totally get it, especially for state institutions. You have to be really, really careful and follow some really silly rules that are put into place, with the right intention, but that they don't have the intended outcome. I don't know when or if that will change, but I hope that people in our positions now, as our generation and the next generation is coming into these positions of power, how are you using that budget? Like, okay, so you have a $50 million budget. I don't think anybody does, but hooray if you do. Like, what are you going to use that for?
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to continue? Like, what can you look for that is just absolutely not necessary anymore?
Mm-hmm.
Or is that massive gala that you do? And I've seen more and more institutions dropping their galas
Mm-hmm.
because they cost as much as they make. And it's so much work. And it's also this kind of archaic way of sitting around a table and like bidding in an auction, and people don't really want to do that anymore. So, how do you redistribute what you have, even if it's not a lot, to empower your people as much as possible? Because then the
Mm-hmm.
work will come.
Yeah. I want to circle back to talking about AI a little bit. And I completely agree with you that AI can help make teams able to be more productive. And, I give AI workshops all over the country. And one of the things I always say, it also lets you spend your time on things that are more strategic and creative because you're
Mm-hmm.
able to, instead of wasting brain power on things that are mundane but still require brain power, you can offload that to something else, to an AI tool, and then use your brain power, your precious, limited, finite brain power on things that are more creative and more strategic. But I'm really curious about your thoughts on, you know, what is this sort of AI world that we're living in? Do you think that will change what we look for in great leaders, or is great leadership is great leadership?
I think that's a complicated question.
I know.
And I will admit fully, I am not an AI expert, which you know, but I love using it. What I can see is AI really leveling the playing field in a lot of ways because it's kind of a shared language. So, writing a job description, um, making a proposal, even doing a presentation, like all of that, AI can help you so much. Taking notes after meetings. So, people who either haven't been trained how to do that, or who don't have time to do that, or who might be, sort of, neurodiverse, and it's harder for them to take notes and then get them out. Like there might be something so hard about actually doing that task. But if AI can do it for you, like I think you're in, that levels the playing field for sure. So I do see it in helping us concentrate on the human centric part of leadership and that creativity and that innovation. And, if we can automate as much as possible, we can absolutely then have teams work together better and be more interdisciplinary, which I think is incredibly important for higher ed in particular. So that's what I see. But I also think that there are so many, again, like just inherent biases against what a good leader is, that AI is a tool and can help us. But if we don't break that down at the highest level, then we're just going to perpetuate the cycle, but with more help taking notes. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, and when I think about like what a leader needs to look like in an AI enabled world, I think that they need to have a combination of strategic vision and tactical playfulness. So, like, they're
Love that.
able to see the big picture about how AI can reshape the work, but also they have this playfulness about them that allows them to tinker and prototype and experiment and encourage their teams to do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then, most important, I think the number one skill, okay, two things. The two biggest skills that I think they need to bring to the table now is change management savvy,
Yes.
because the AI is going to constantly change our work.
Yep.
And really good leaders are going to be needed to bring people along, reduce their fear, and make that change feel exciting and not threatening. And then, most importantly, they need to be endlessly curious and really
Yeah.
open to learning, even when they aren't the expert at the table. So,
Yes.
because, VPs and AVPs are such busy people. And I know, you were an AVP too. I was a VP. We might be at our desk a total of 15 minutes in a day.
Maybe. Yeah.
Right. And like, it's really hard to develop expertise in AI unless you're like super curious about it and spending the time on the evenings and weekends in that situation. So they have to be willing to say, I don't have all the answers, but somebody on the team who does have more time to play with it and explore it, I'm going to lean into their expertise and be willing for
Mm-hmm.
them to be the expert on this. So I think bringing those skills to the table, I think will really set some folks apart. And I think that's where that sort of like the norming that we were talking about
Yeah.
earlier, about like office norms, that tactical playfulness, like playfulness is not something that you hear a lot about when you're talking about what leadership looks like. And that's something that I think people who have that playfulness and that willing to explore and experiment tend to not sort of line up with those norms. But they're, I think, going to be the leaders that thrive in the next decade.
You bet. You bet. And that is, I love that term, tactical playfulness. And to all of you who are listening, who are leaders, encourage that as much as possible. I totally agree with you, Jamie. Like, that is critical. But you're not going to feel like playing or being in that space if, honestly, if you don't feel safe at work.
Mm-hmm.
And for so many people, the workplace isn't safe,
Right.
and I'll quote Wilson Okello, who's this amazing professor who came and did a talk for us at a conference, one of the CASE conferences I chaired. And his opening line was, higher education was made for white men by white men. And I've never forgotten that. And his research is fabulous and everyone should check him out. But like, I've never forgotten that, because it's the same is true with the workplace, but particularly in higher education, where we still have tenure and, just this hierarchy, I never can say that right, but of, that was made for men, by men, white men. And so when you get to a place where you want to bust that open and have this playful space, which I think is such a good thing to want to do, and you're right, and AI is going to help us free up the time to do that. We have to remember that we have to fix some other stuff too in order for that space to feel accessible for everyone. And I'll say there's a TED talk I absolutely love, and I'll give you the link if you can put it in your show notes, but it's by Jodi Ann Bury, and it's called The Myth of Bringing Your Whole Self to Work. And I think it's required watching for everyone in today's workplace. But it's the myth of bringing your full authentic self to work. And Jodi Ann is a writer and amazing. She's written a bunch of really great articles, and I think she's coming out with a book. She's in the Seattle area. But she shows that it is unsafe for people of color, particularly women of color, to come and show up as their authentic selves, because when they do, they are told to conform to professionalism, and I'm using air quotes if you're not looking at me right now, which is defined by the patriarchy.
Right.
And so it's impossible to show up authentically, to feel safe enough to be playful, to do any of that work if you can't be your actual self and you're not comfortable enough to do that. And that's another thing that leaders now can really work on, which is, how do you create that space by busting norms? Because especially if you're in a position of power, especially if you're a white person, even a white woman, like, that is your job. That is our job, is to work on the hard work of busting that stuff, because it's already people of color are doing more work than anybody else to show up in a workplace that isn't made for them. So how do we use our power in the right way? I don't know the right way. Like, I'm still learning too. So definitely not saying like I have it all figured out, but I do know, and I learned from Jodi Ann's TED Talk, that I stopped asking my staff to show up authentically after I watched that talk, because I realized they couldn't, not all of them, and that I didn't feel safe showing up authentically, because when I did, I was told, you've got to be more positive. I know that this bad thing is happening and it's hard, but don't talk about it. What's the positive spin on that? Or like, I've been told, like, I know you're really smart, but you need to not act like you know the answers to everything. I'm not saying I'm perfect. Sure, maybe I'm a know-it-all. I don't know. But like, a lot of that was a man telling a woman to not make the other men in the room feel embarrassed. So there's just a lot that goes into that is complicated. And I'd love to hear what you think. Like to create that playful, what do you think needs to be in place?
Oh gosh, that's an excellent question. I mean, I think you're right. Like, focusing on making sure that your office or your department or your division or your unit or whatever unit of measure you lead is a place that truly feels safe, and that people have that psychological safety where I write about this in my book. Like, sometimes you feel like you are walking a tightrope where if you come up with a wild idea, people are going to give you sort of this like, look, you can't see my face because this is a podcast, but this like, oh, that person's dumb or that person's goofy again, or what a dumb idea. But to create and foster a place where people can do that. And that's hard work. It's important work. It's really hard work to create a space of psychological safety. And if you're like the top leader where you have other leaders under you, making sure that every single one of those leaders is also doing that is really important and really hard, because people have to be committed to doing that. So you can be doing all the right things, but if people 2 layers down from you are not creating a safe space for their team, you don't have a safe space in your office.
It's so beautiful when you're in a room where that works. When you can get that synergy, it's so much fun, and like, laughing at work and just like being with people that are interesting and fun to be with, or that even if you don't really get along with them, you have some sort of really well understood code of how to get along with them in the workplace, because you've had trainings on how to do that, because you've had useful time with people helping you understand yourself and understand others, so you can better really kind of be authentic at work. And it's just so beautiful when that happens. And do not expect it of people if they don't feel safe, and I think I've seen a lot of white leaders, women and men, say, we're all a family here. And there's a great woman on LinkedIn, Madison Butler, who posts all the time. And, she loves to post about like, it's not a family. This is not a family. I am here to get paid to do a job. And sure, I don't want to have a horrible time at work, but like, I don't need to be your best friend. And that was something for me, like, I'm a very much like, I want everyone to like me. That was really important to me. I had to learn that was actually hindering others. My need for them to like me was hindering their comfort at work. Yeah. So that, these are these hard lessons that you have to learn and feel really bad, but you got to go through them, because it just perpetuates this cycle of fake positivity and unfairness, really.
I really feel like we could talk about this for the next hour.
I know. I can't believe it's almost over.
I know.
Sorry.
Where can people find you if they want to chat with you or learn more about your coaching or your leadership development?
Yeah, you can find me at my website, which is EWBcoaching.com, for Ellen Whitlock Baker. I post a lot on LinkedIn, and I have exciting news in that I am actually launching a podcast in a couple of months, maybe weeks. I don't know. Process of recording the first episodes right now. But I'm really, really excited about it, because it's going to get to be more of this conversation where, particularly since I'm now out of the workforce, I feel like I can say the quiet part out loud, which is what we were talking about at the beginning, and really dig into how can we as leaders make our workspace safer and healthier for everyone, and recognize that it's not. And I think even just recognizing that it's not is a surprise to some people. So that's what I'm really excited about. So stay tuned. It's called the Hard at Work podcast.
I love it. I love it. Listeners, as always, you can find me on my website at solvehighered.com, LinkedIn at Jaime Hunt, Jaime. You can also email me at jamie@solvehighered.com. And my book is out now, Heart Over Hype. The website for it is heartoverhypebook.com. There is, like I said, the last third of the book is all about empathy and leadership. And the book is packed full of exercises. So I have actual exercises on how to market with empathy, but then also exercises to help you grow your skills in leading with empathy. So check that out. And as always, listeners, let's go bust some silos.
Woohoo!
Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO is part of the Enrollify podcast network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month. We've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our shows help higher ed marketers and admissions professionals find their next big idea and feature a selection of the industry best as your host. Learn from Mallory Wilsey, Seth Odell, Jenny Lee Fowler, Eddie Francis, and so many other of your favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.